of the Spotlight series focused on professional development to support and advance quality physical education, today I'm going to be speaking about preparing students for healthy, active lifestyles. And to start, I want to acknowledge where I live and I teach and I learn, which is in Nanaimo, British Columbia, on the traditional territories of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. And so Haitchka Siem to Snuneymuxw First Nation, and for the land that I live and learn on. The agenda today is I'm going to share a do-it-yourself analogy, the DIY analogy. I'm going to talk a little bit about conceptual physical education, which I believe is essential for quality physical education, especially at the middle and secondary physical and health education levels. Then, as I mentioned in my, as what was mentioned in my description, I'm going to describe some approaches to engaging students in personal program planning, and then we'll have a time for questions. So you might have heard this before: you can do it, we can help. This saying is in dispute. In fact, I was going to say this is the Home Depot slogan that many would recognize, which is you can do it and we can help. But right now there's actually a legal dispute between Sunshine Ace, which is a hardware store, and Home Depot about who really owns that slogan. Regardless of that legal dispute, this is really the overarching theme that I want to share today. And I'm going to juxtapose this you can do it, we can help with possibly what is being delivered in many physical education programs, which is I'm going to show you how to do it. And we're going to do it in the gym. And this is particularly highlighted by the COVID crisis, which is now students are on their own in the world. And there isn't a physical education class, which is like real life. As soon as students hit grade 10, and once physical education becomes elective, the statistics vary, but across Canada, less than 50% of students, and in some provinces up to, only 80 or only 20%. So 20% of students elect physical education when it becomes an elective. So as adolescents transition into adulthood, we've got to arm them with skills so they can do it on their own. And you can do it is what we're saying to the students, and we can help. And that kind of mindset is what I think needs to be infused into physical and health education curricula to support physical literacy, fitness, health, and wellness for a lifetime for students. And here's just, some people's idea of a do-it-yourself is maybe refinishing and distressing a piece of furniture. I like to build things. I also like to garden. So that was a basil crop from a couple of years ago. The point of all this do-it-yourself is there's a lot of meaning and engagement and learning that goes on when you take on a project. For example, you could buy a distressed piece of furniture, the piece on the right, and it might be really nice in your house, and you might like that. But if you actually did the work, if you engaged in the process and sourced out the paint and did some sanding to prepare the surface and cleaned the surface and then applied the paint and did some distressing techniques, there'd be more ownership and love likely of that dresser. And there'd be tons of learning. And so when someone came in and said, oh, I love this dresser, you'd be able to tell them about it. Or when someone said they were thinking about doing something, distressing a piece of furniture or refinishing a piece of furniture, you'd have all this knowledge by engaging in the process. Just like in gardening, I've been gardening the same plot of land now. I'm going on my 11th year, and I say I'm just in like grade 3 of gardening because I learn every year. I learn new techniques. I try new things. I revise things based on my experience and and my schedule. I used to start and plant a whole bunch of different crops, and I've now winnowed it down to the ones that are most important to me. So there's this whole process of when I engage in a process, you know, for myself, with myself, and consider myself in the equation, it becomes more meaningful. Scott Kretschmar, who is a mentor to me, talks about the difference between shallow play and deep play, and we want to get people into deep play for their fitness, health, and wellness, or their gardening, or whatever it happens to be, because fitness, health, and wellness is a lifelong project. And what we know is many environments don't support active, healthy living. In fact, they also don't support healthy eating. And we know that active and healthy living requires skills. And we're going to talk about those skills. And we know that skills need to be practiced, just like dribbling a basketball, or you know, working with a gymnastics ball, or whatever the skill happens to be, or practicing a kick in Taekwondo or a defensive maneuver. And our window to students, our window to support students' skills is finite. And I spoke about that earlier, that a lot of students don't elect physical education once it becomes an elective. And so a question to just let rest in your mind: does your physical and health education program support students' physical activity outside of physical and health education class? And I could put more than physical activity there, but just to shorten it, you could insert fitness, health, wellness outside of physical and health education class. So consider that, because this is a perfect time where students don't have classes, and are they engaged? So we know fitness, health, and wellness is a lifelong project, and my encouragement here is that we start early, when all students get support from professionals like you, who do this most important work in our schools with students. You know, start as early as possible. So you'll hear me talk about that and as I move through this presentation. And I want to make the point that physical literacy is much more than fundamental movement skills. Fundamental movement skills are valuable, there's no doubt about it. But there are higher order physical literacy skills that are specific. And these are additional skills we need to maintain active and healthy lifestyles. So think of these things as skills, just as you know, catching a ball, or serving a volleyball, or receiving a pass, or executing a dance step, or performing a yoga posture. These higher order physical literacy skills that I'm going to talk about are very specific and are much needed. And you know, so as I talk about this conceptual physical education, which was the next part, and I'm still going to weave the do-it-yourself in here, what we've been doing for students, and you'll notice the data at the bottom right corner. This is the Stairway to Lifetime fitness model proposed by Charles Corbin. He goes by Chuck Corbin. He's a mentor to me still. And you can see in 1979, he proposed, that's over 41 years ago, this model to lifetime fitness. And there's no question that people want to get, if you ask any physical educator, physical and health educator, you know, what's your goal for students is to have a lifetime of physical activity, a lifetime of fitness, lifetime of health. I don't think that's in debate. I would argue, though, that the way we go about it needs to be revisited. We spend a lot of time with kids at the level of dependence, getting them fit, doing activity and exercise, you know, finding this activity that we're going to do with students. We do it with students in the class, and then that's the class. Or, you know, we can get kids fit. There's no doubt about it. We can run a fitness, you know, a sort of a boot camp, a circuit exercise. We can get kids fit. There's no problem. We could do it to them. But that keeps them at the level of dependence, so that when they leave physical education class, they don't know what to do. And Corbin, way back when, proposed that we move people up to the level of decision making. This is in my description where I talked about highlighting the need to develop student self-management skills. And so at the level of decision making, important self-management skills like self-assessment of fitness and activity, and I'll talk about other health behaviors, self-planning, and if we give students, particularly the younger adolescents and the older adolescents, these self-planning and self-assessment skills, self-management skills at the level of decision-making, then we allow them to move up to this level of independence, where they can support a lifetime of physical activity and fitness and wellness. So that's a model that serves as the backdrop for what I'm going to talk about. And so a big part of this are these skills, which are self-management skills. These are not motor skills, but we categorize them 3 ways. There are skills that help you begin change, skills that help you make changes, and skills that help you maintain change. And I'll provide a couple of examples. So some skills that might help someone begin change might be a self-assessment. They do a self-assessment maybe of their sleep, of their diet, of their physical activity, of their fitness, and go, oh, wow, I didn't know I was there. I might like to be a little bit higher, or I like right where I am. But if the answer is, oh, I'd like to change that, then that's a skill that helps people begin change. So awareness is really a self-assessment supports awareness. Skills that help people begin change is knowledge. Knowledge about the importance of physical activity for health, the knowledge of healthy behaviors to support mental health, to support physical health, to support learning, those kinds of things. To have them feel good and be functional in their lives. And then finding social support is a skill that helps people begin change, because if I can find someone to help me do this dietary change or change my social media use or increase my activity, I'm more likely to do it. There are skills to help people make changes. These are just a selection that I'm just sharing. You know, setting goals helps people make changes. Choosing good activities that support them help people make changes. And I'm going to speak more to these skills specifically in a minute. And again, you'll see finding social support helps people make changes. You know, one of the ways that many adults make changes is they don't find social support with another human, although often they do, and I'll talk a little bit about that, but they get an animal that they need to walk. And so that helps people make change. Yeah, I got to get out and walk the dog. And then there are skills that help people maintain change. So self-monitoring, I'll speak to that. Time management, I mean, as adults, if you're an adult listening here and you're leading an active lifestyle, you know, in order to maintain that active lifestyle or that sleep schedule or your eating habits to keep them healthy, there's some time management to prepare food, to plan, to get to bed early and so you get enough sleep, all those kinds of things. And overcoming barriers. I often speak in my talks about all the barriers, particularly with healthy eating, that are thrown at us, you know. So if we go chronologically right now, we'd run into Canada Day. People have a barbecue and there's lots of snacks and likely overeating and maybe some indulgence into alcohol. Then we go to Labor Day, then we go to Thanksgiving, then we get to Christmas. Then we get maybe to Valentine's Day for some, Easter, but you can see the hits just keep coming. There's a whole bunch of barriers that get in the way of healthy eating. Birthday parties, okay, so let's bring out the cakes and the cookies. And sure, if they're a treat, that's fine, but these events just seem to keep popping up, and that might be a barrier to healthy eating. So those are just some examples of ways we can categorize these self-management skills. And notice I throw social support. You know, I'm going to speak a little bit about the data about social support in just a second. So just a selection of self-management skills would be the ability to self-assess many things. I'll speak to that. Goal setting, choosing good activities, time management, self-monitoring, finding social support, overcoming barriers, reducing risk factors, and building confidence, and there are more. And just shifting gears to hammer this home, you'll notice this article is from James Sallis. He's really the person who spearheaded the active living, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation active living web resource. He's a prolific researcher in terms of health behavior change. And you can see in 1992, so we're getting on 30 years here, consolidating the science on the determinants of physical activity and interventions that support youth physical activity. Number one, youth physical activity promotion programs, which I believe physical education is one, and health education, should focus on teaching activity and behavioral skills that promote generalization and maintenance of physical activity during youth and enhance the probability of carryover to adulthood. So what I'm talking about is nothing new. James Sallis was talking about this, Chuck Corbin was talking about this, Russ Pate was talking about this, and Tom McKenzie was talking about this back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Oh, look at this. I know there's been this big focus on comprehensive school health, and a comprehensive approach to promoting physical activity in youth would have school physical education as a primary component, but it would also include community organizations, families, healthcare settings, the media, and other appropriate channels, and other aspects of the school for sure. School physical education curricula that promote lifetime physical activity in age-appropriate ways from pre-kindergarten through college should be developed, evaluated, and disseminated. Teachers in training need education and support in the use of physical education curricula that promote lifetime physical activity, of which conceptual physical education is one model. And there's more, and we'll share these slides with you, but I also want to share some of this research. So when we're talking about supporting physical activity for a lifetime, if we move from working with kids in physical education, now once they move into their young adulthood years, 18 to 30, Marcia Dowda down at South Carolina did the work looking at what are the correlates of what physical activity among US adults. What are the conditions or behaviors that correlate with physical activity among young adults? And positively, education was correlated. So the more education, the more activity. If you're engaging in weight loss behavior, more activity. Notice that social support, the higher you score on a social support index, the more likely you're going to be physical activity. Interestingly here, maybe not funny, for some is marital status is negatively associated. I guess people say, well, I've got my mate. I don't need to impress anyone. I'm just gonna maybe watch some TV. I don't know. Then we look at Abby King out of Stanford, who's a prolific researcher who looked at the determinants of physical activity and interventions in adult. What we know is they're complex and multifaceted. There are many approaches, and there's no one size fits all, which really reinforces what we already know, that it needs to be personal for people to be engaged. And then some of the research on tracking and looking at the factors that affect the levels of physical activity in adults, because as I said earlier, most of us would love our students to be active for a lifetime. What we see here is that successful interventions tailor programs to individual needs, account for personal levels of fitness, allow for personal control of the activity and of its outcomes, and provide for social support by family, peers, and communities. So that serves as the backdrop for this next segment of talking about engaging students in personal program planning. And I've always used this sort of five-part process of personal program planning as a way for us to online or face-to-face engage students in their own personal health, fitness, and wellness. And so you can see these elements, and I'll walk us through them. So we'll start with self-assessment, which is an important self-management skills that help us begin change. And we can use the stages of change model. And We can think of this from a dietary perspective, or we can think about this from a physical activity perspective, which this one shows. People might self-assess themselves and find, hey, I'm sedentary, I'm inactive, and I plan to stay that way. And you know some students that are there. But there's lots of interesting reflection and some interesting engagement with students to talk about, have them project in the future how that might impact them in their future life. They're inactive thinkers. I'm inactive, but I'm thinking about becoming active. There are planners, there's activators, and there's regular exercisers. So we, in conceptual physical education, we use the stages of change to get students to connect themselves to where they are for certain behavior changes. And so, oops, I'm going to go back. What would we self-assess and look at our where we are at stages of change? Well, on our health-related fitness. So cardiorespiratory fitness, flexibility, strength, muscular endurance, body composition, and power, which is considered a health-related fitness component because it's associated with bone density later on in life. Assess physical activity, diet, sleep, social support, social media, cell phone use, self-assess their self-talk, maybe substance abuse. You can see how this leads into wellness and health. So these are great opportunities for us to get students to self-assess where they are at. So, for diet, there's like food logs. For physical activity, there's physical activity logs. For fitness assessments, I'm going to show you a resource that I have for free where you can do some self-assessments. With students can do self-assessments of their health-related fitness. And social media and cell phone use, well, students can use their phones because phones can now have track their use. So lots of opportunity there. And remember, self-assessment is also, when we're talking about things like health-related fitness, it's a physical skill combined with specific knowledge of how to do the assessment that yields health information. And in all cases, sleep, diet, social media use, substance abuse is private health information. Students' private health information that is not to be shared unless asked of the student to be shared with someone else. So those are some ways to engage people in self-assessment. How do we engage students in goal setting? Well, I think it's really important to start off by teaching students about goal setting, that it's process or product related. So a process goal might be, I'm going to walk to school 3 out of 5 days per week, if that's possible for someone, for the next 3 weeks. Versus a product goal might be, I want to be able to lift 10 more pounds or weigh 10 more pounds, or I want to be able to, eat a certain amount. It's an end goal. And it's really important to acknowledge that process goals are best suited for short and moderate range goals, because to the extent I engage in healthy processes, products will come. And product goals, like I want to lose 15 pounds or I want to gain 10 pounds, are best for long-term goals. Because if we set up short-term product goals, we set people up for failure. And there's research around this. Goal setting helps adolescents and young adults make change in physical activity and fruit and vegetable consumption. So engaging students in this process of goal setting is really important. Then there's choosing activities, which you'd say, is that a skill? Yeah, that's a skill. I mean, and there's several skills that are balled up in this. So have you ever had students start to think about their attitudes towards different activities? Like, do they like to be active alone or in groups? Do they like to be active in sport, in team sports or individual sports? And even if they compete in team sports, do they do it for the camaraderie or do they do it for the competitiveness? Do they like to be active in the outdoors and the indoors? With groups alone, all those kinds of things, finding out what students like, and a simple reflection, have them write about what are the activities that they really like. Even if it is video gaming, what is it about that they like? So start to have them build out those attitudes and see if those could transfer. That's sort of the extension of that activity. They can also choose activities based on their physical skills. What are they good at? So identifying some of their strengths and weaknesses. Oh, I like to run, but I don't like, racket sports don't work for me. It's all about making it personal. So having students explore their physical skills, and then most importantly, their environment. Only working with kids and doing activity with kids in physical education that doesn't connect to the local environment, I think does them some disservice and isn't really putting activity, fitness, health, wellness in context of what they'll do once they leave physical education. What is in their environment? What are the seasons like? How does that impact different activities? What are the clubs? So having students do an environmental scan of the free physical activity, outdoor resources, free indoor resources, pay for services, clubs, and have them go visit and one of those. Most clubs and services will allow people to have one trial visit and have them do a reflection on it, share that with each other. That can really create some rich discussion. Also, choosing activities gets students engaged in community, and that's what we want them doing. Is it CrossFit for them? Is it group fitness classes? Is it yoga? Is it walking? Is it hiking? What is it in their community that they connect with? And we know that with community connections, there's a great article by Dolly Lambden and Heather Irwin in Jopard, and there's about getting youth into communities, get communities in schools, and opening schools to communities. And I know there are several exemplary schools doing that in British Columbia and across Canada. After we've worked through a self-assessment and set some goals and choose some activities, it's time to develop a plan. And this is where, when we talk about physical literacy and people having the skills and knowledge, confidence and competence to maintain active and healthy lifestyles or maintain physical activity for a lifetime, well, this is where we have an opportunity in conceptual physical education to teach students, likely in a classroom setting, online setting, about health-related fitness knowledge, so the different components of health-related fitness, the training principles, like the principle of progression to gradually overload the body, the principle of specificity, that you get what you train for, the principle of maintenance, which is basically use it or lose it. These are basic training principles. And remember, in middle school and high school, students are starting to do algebra and then maybe even calculus, and they're starting to read Shakespeare, and they're dissecting animals and using microscopes and balancing chemical equations. They certainly can learn training principles. And then learning about the FIT formula, the many formulae, the frequency, intensity, time, and type. And here's a resource from Fitness for Life Canada, where we have the FIT, the frequency, intensity, time for moderate intensity physical activity, vigorous sports and aerobics that build cardiorespiratory fitness, muscle fitness, flexibility exercises. So learning those, that's some knowledge that's central to developing a plan. Once students have developed a plan and they get out and do it, it's never been easier to monitor behavior with cell phones these days. They can log their activities. There's so many apps for logging, their cell phone use, logging sleep, logging physical activity, logging their different runs, whatever they do, walks. Great opportunity to do reflections because they can blog, they can vlog. This all serves evidence of their engagement in the material. And really, as I started talking about at the beginning, which is this idea of building skills and starting early. Remember this lifelong fitness, health, and wellness project, for them to be able to do it themselves, we can support them early and often to run through this cycle of self-assessment, goal setting, choosing activities, developing a plan, and monitoring behavior on a variety of fitness, physical activity, health and wellness any of those categories, they can run through this. Maybe they want to do a self-assessment on their breathing or their mindfulness or their mental well-being, and then start to set a goal maybe of meditating. And what kind of meditation? Choosing activities are you going to do? A guided meditation, a silent meditation, a yogic meditation. All right, I'm going to need to develop that plan. It might not be so extensive if I'm going to be guided by someone online or something, and then I can monitor how often I do that and how I'm feeling. This could be around sleep. As I said, there's so many things we could start with and self-assess. Point being is I want students to wind themselves through this cycle. I want you to guide them. Students can do it, you can help. And so likely much of this won't happen in physical education. And you know, if we teach them these processes, support them in physical and health education, we can have them do this activity and come back into our active settings and do active reflections and sharings and group sharings and presentations and demonstrations. But the point is they need to wind through this cycle many times before they get to the 10th grade and they're going to leave, because they could rely on this as a skill. This personal program planning platform is a skill unto itself. And the more they practice this process, the more it'll be embedded and become a skill that they're confident and competent at using, and we can give them feedback. The other thing I want to say about this is running through this process of self-assessment, setting goals, choosing activities, developing a plan, and monitoring. They create their own experiences. When they do it for themselves, by themselves, they build this knowledge through experience that they're excited to share with others. And I've seen that when students go and try something out in the community and they come and share it in small groups and then maybe in larger groups, and someone says, well, I went to this activity and I didn't like it, and someone says, you should come to this was so awesome. And then they go, now they're modeling social support right there, and they get to create their own experiences. They get to talk about and share. They become their own advocates for the activity because it's personal. And long have we known that choice is motivating for students. Long have we known from the psychological work of Maureen Weiss that in adolescents, particularly female adolescents, they're interested in individual improvement, and choice and individual activities to improve their physical health. And we know that choice is motivating. This now creates connections, as I said. It creates connections to the community. It creates connections to their bodies if they start to do something on mindfulness, sleep. It creates connections to other people, different settings in their community, different people in the class, rather than grouping people out by team sports, which is not that we need to do away with team sports, but it needs to become a smaller part of what we do, certainly by 8th, 9th, and 10th grade. Because remember, students will be leaving our physical education classes, activity settings, and moving out into their communities, where if you want them to have a lifetime of activity, they're going to need these skills to do it on their own. And it creates their own stories. And I think I've spoken to this. When they start to have a narrative about their physical fitness, their physical activity, their sleep, any part of their health, their wellness, mental, physical health, they can create their own stories, change their own stories, and it becomes very powerful. And those are the things that we celebrate in out in the world when you see people saying, I did this and it changed my life. Well, this is an opportunity to make physical and health education very personal and engage students in choice and creating their own personal plans that support them over the long term. And I mean, I was a varsity volleyball athlete at the University of Victoria. And sure, I believe sports are great, but we know very early on, the message is sent when we've got teams that have cuts that not every volleyball's not for everybody. Basketball's not for everybody. Many people don't spend time in those gyms. after our physical education experiences. When people get out and get active, they're doing it in their communities. So it's 9:42, and I'm gonna share a couple of resources. I want to disclose that one resource is I'm an author of, which is Fitness for Life Canada, Preparing Teens for Healthy and Active Lifestyles, with my co-authors Chuck Corbin, Kelly Baker from St. John's, Newfoundland, and Memorial University, and John Bile. He's a retired professor, and he's in Ontario. We've got some high school free student web resources that I want to show you. There's in this link that we're going to get out to you somehow, there's developing physical literacy and secondary physical education. There's some 3 parts to doing this, some more guidance on it. And then there's Fitness for Life content and some supporting resources that you can get through this link. I've also got a short reading that I'll try to get, well, I won't try, I'll get to Faye and maybe she can figure out how we can share that. It's called Extra Extra, read all about the shift in high school physical education, which is a viewpoint, a very short article that I wrote. And so I want to just bring up the website that we have, and you can see this is a free student web resource. So if students want to go in to chapter 5, which is about supporting physical activity and healthy eating, there's all these web topics. Does your town or city make the grade? So this is that environmental scan. They can then click ahead and there's a whole bunch of active living research, which I talked about, tools and resources. So it's really a web resource for students to learn more about this topic. And I can go back to the chapter menu. There are even some workshops about social support for physical activity and eating, or finding social support. These are worksheets that simply can be clicked on and then opened up. And it's opening up on a separate screen, but I'll bring it over to this screen so you can see. And you know, it's a free resource, but it's really a survey of how you how do you receive social support, and how do you give. Many people love to help others, but don't allow social support in. But that's just a sampling. As you can see, there are 21 chapters that even move into chapters on managing stress. So there's web topics on that, on depression, teen resources, substance abuse, cyberbullying. You can also see there are worksheets in there. And then there's some videos here on different exercises for relaxation. Last thing I want to show you is that if you went into our some of these chapters, there's videos on the health-related fitness tests and how to do them. And then if you go into the worksheets, there's also free worksheets on the step and 1 mile test for students to self-assess them. So they can do this on their own. You can connect them to this. We've made these resources free for you. And thanks to Human Kinetics for doing that. And there's, you know, as I said, there's so many web topics that students could demonstrate their knowledge or engage in topics that are interesting. So what I want to finish on, and it's 9:45, and we said I'd finish on 9:45, is just this idea that what we're going for is this personal program planning. Remember, what we should be saying to students is, you can do it and we can help. We can support them through this process. And the more we do this, the more we're going to develop their physical literacy and specific knowledge and skills that support them for a lifetime of activity. Thanks for being here under, for many, what is a real emotional circumstances, both in the COVID situation and the tensions that are going on about race and inclusion. And, you know, well, I guess the one thing I know about humans is that we all want to be loved, and we are all lovable. And so share that love with your fellow humans today, and maybe some humans that you don't know today and that you normally wouldn't reach out to. And I'll end on that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Guy. Thank you for today's presentation. It's great. And we're now going to begin answering some of the questions submitted during today's presentation. And as a reminder, you can still submit questions through the questions pane in your attendee control panel. So Guy, our first question is from Linda. And the question is, I'm right at the beginning of encouraging and building active lifestyle in kindergarten. So what is the most important message would you suggest, or how should I take what I have heard today and use it in kindergarten?
Oh, wow, that's such a great question. And always, what's the most important thing? You know, the most important becomes an extremism, which is always hard, you know, the best or the most important, but such a great question. It's so encouraging to hear you, Linda, doing this at such a young age. I often stress, you know, my work has been mainly at the secondary level, but the more we can allow students to practice some self-assessment, and it can be all sorts of things, right? It could be basic self-assessments on different levels of different health-related fitness assessments. So their flexibility, they can understand, can I stretch to my toes? Can I reach behind my back and, you know, over my, you know, do the zipper test? Can, you know, how far can I get? And what could I do? You know, having kids come up with ideas of what could they do to get more flexible or to jump higher, to start to engage them in the questions. The more those kindergartens start to ask questions, you know, the greater the opportunity. So I guess I would revert to the starting point, Linda, with these kids is this idea of, I think it's two parts. It's self-assessment, but in order to do the self-assessment, just teaching them a little bit about the different components of health-related fitness on a very basic level, right? So kids can understand that when they run really hard and fast, that they start to breathe really hard. And so, you know, what allows them to do that, and how can you build that system? And if we're doing self-assessments with kids, we're never going to give them fitness scores. It's to have them practice it, talk about why being able to run for a long period of time might be really important. Why might it be flexible, and have them actually come up with the answers of why flexibility might be good. And they might come up with ideas of what that might relate to in their life. Well, it'll help me do some swimming because I have to paddle overhead, or it'll help me ride my bike farther. So, you know, Linda, I would say, you know, starting with some practice of self-assessments in all different areas of not only fitness, health-related fitness, but you know, maybe have them start thinking about where they're physically active, and even talking about their sleep, and did you have a good sleep, and what makes a good sleep. So you know, those kind of ideas around healthy behaviors are a great place to start. And what I would say, even for teachers, so you know, this is where it's most important. Do what you love, Linda. Share. The more passionate and enthusiastic you are about what you want to share with the kids and engage the kids in, you know, that health behavior, that fitness behavior, that wellness behavior is the best place to start.
All right, thank you. And I think there is another question that is related to this. So I know you're talking about self-assessment. So can you provide some examples or resources? So what tests do you see for self-assessment of their power? That question is from Anne.
Okay, so if you want to get specific about power, can you still see my screen, Faye?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. So let's go here. Do we have chapter 10, muscle fitness? What do we have for videos? Oh yeah, I'll go back to main menu. Okay, so let's talk about resources first. So let's unpack this. So what self-assessment? So sounds like Anne's talking about fitness self-assessments. And remember, there's a whole slew of self-assessments that we can do. Okay, where is the self-assessment? Okay, so there's some self-assessment in the muscle fitness here. I want to say, I'll go broad again about the self-assessments. And I'm just, as I'm doing this, I'm walking you through So you can see if you click on the videos, there's the self-assessments here, arm test, zipper. Oh, why did I go away from chapter 11, which was muscle fitness? So what are the self-assessments? Here are some posture tests. So I'm showing you some resources for all the tests. Your question was, which ones should we do? Well, ultimately, that's a really touchy question because people start to do fitness assessments, they do them to students. In the ideal situation, and what we would do is we'd find out, from students, we can have, in a good conceptual physical education program, we expose them to fitness assessments for all levels, all different health-related fitness components. Power being one of them. So you could use a broad jump, a vertical jump. You could use a seated medicine ball toss. Most power tests are actually fairly easy to administer. But the important part about the self-assessment is then to ask people or to get people to move to the next step, which is then, do you want to set a goal of improving that power? So I'm going to start with the end. The ultimate thing I would love students to leave high school physical and health education with would be if they decided that, let's say, rock climbing was their sport, that they would know what self-assessments for the sport of rock climbing would be really useful. So likely a hand grip dynamometer, a basic test of grip strength. They would need muscular endurance, and they would know some ways to assess muscular endurance, maybe leg muscular endurance and upper body muscular endurance. They would likely need to have a beneficial body composition for rock climbing because you've got to move your body along the rocks. How would they assess their body composition? There's many ways to assess body composition, so exposing them to those. They would need flexibility. How would you assess some flexibility? They would need power for some bouldering movements, for moving to a explosive movement to a new grip. How would you assess that? So ultimately, we want to expose students to a variety of fitness, physical activity, sleep, dietary, social media use self-assessments. But then we want them to put together their own fitness, health, wellness, personal program plan based on those. So I hope that answers your questions, which is, I would never use one-off, and I would want students to start to connect. What would that self-assessment be useful for? Would it be useful for you in your activity that you're engaged in? If so, would you like to improve it? What activities would you do to improve it? How would you execute that plan? How would you self-monitor that and then reassess? So, I was a strength and conditioning coach for the Los Angeles Kings for 4 years between 1996 and 2000, and people think that what I'm talking about is fancy. This is the same process of working with high-level athletes. Let's do a baseline assessment of your sleep, your diet, your fitness. Let's set some goals. Let's choose the activities. Let's develop a plan. Let's monitor and reassess to see that we've made some gains. So hopefully that sets you up with both some resources and conceptually what we're going for, Anne.
Awesome. Okay, and our next question is from Lyndon, and the question is, what has your experience been like working with school divisions on the cultural shift towards more developmentally appropriate movement opportunities for students in grade K to 12?
Yeah, well, whoa, just a simple question. Hey, Linda. She's asking what my experience has been, and my experience has been where it's been successful. There has been a champion or many champions, because we do need a shift. That was at the last physical and health education conference in Montreal. That I did the presentation on Change the Game, and I wrote that article about the shift in high school physical education that we've been sorely waiting for. we need champions, and we need to bring it, you know, for many people, I think the experience is even with champions, we need to bring it in gradually, and we need to bring it in early. So, you know, I think it was Linda who was talking about it starting early, so that kids get used to that part of physical education is doing this conceptual physical education, which is learning about personal program planning, which are essential skills and knowledge for maintaining healthy and active lifestyles. We need to start bringing that, dripping that in early, and I think it needs to start taking a bigger role as we move into middle school, and the larger role in secondary physical education. So it needs a champion. It needs to be brought in easy, and it doesn't require a whole bunch of new toys and equipment. What it needs is people working through this process. And my experience has been that the way to do this is for teachers, particularly if you've got a team of teachers, for the teachers to start to pick their areas that they really want to specialize in. And this is where we saw students take a lot of ownership and pride in their knowledge. For example, someone becomes sort of the nutrition person on the physical education team. Someone becomes sort of the strength and power person. Someone might become the aerobic fitness or group fitness or yoga person. And people work in different ways. So the yoga person might be the mindfulness person that also works more on the mental wellness piece. The nutrition person might also take on the sleep and dietary piece. And so people start to associate different teachers with different specialties. And really, that's an exciting piece because they start to see your passion. It gets back to, I think it was Linda's original question of, you know, what do I start with? Start with what you're passionate about. And so teachers choosing what their passion is and starting to put in these pieces. Then they become champions, but you need to start with a champion, and we need to start early and start to drip in this stuff. And, you know, I do believe a cultural shift is needed in physical education. If we're still playing full-sided team sports, we're missing the mark. There is room for small-sided team sports, who are part of physical education, but not all of physical education. We need to infuse conceptual physical education and prepare students for physically active lives, healthy lives through this personal program planning. If we truly want kids to be active for a lifetime and set them up for with skills that support that.
Awesome. And we've received some questions regarding the resources, so I will just answer to them directly here. So Jocelyn, Beth, and Oscar, so you were asking about the resources, and I think we can provide a link for the resource in the follow-up email. And these resources right now you're looking at, I think they're only available in English. And I will throw in a link very soon in the chat, so you can visit this link for more information. So right now, these resources, I believe they are open access, but ideally, probably they are offered actually as like a benefit package of the textbook. So I think Human Kinetics would appreciate to get in touch with you beforehand and to grant the access. So I will throw
Actually, Faye,
yeah.
I'm going to interrupt there.
Yes. Okay.
They're not. These are actually.
Okay.
I've just provided the link in the chat box. Those things that I was showing are free student web resource materials. If they want more, we can certainly share more. And yes, I hear that comment. We don't have French materials. I don't know, can we get people the slideshow at all with these hyperlinks? Is that possible or not?
I can check in with Megan from Human Kinetics and confirm this.
Okay, and if not, they can watch this video, and here it is. We also have middle school resources, and of course, you know, I do want to say that, you know, one way to get started is our textbook is already organized and
Mhm.
shares all of this information in a really organized component with extensive teacher resources and lesson plans.
Awesome. Awesome. Um, and the next question is from, let's see, it's from one attendee. I think I lost the name here, but I will just read out the question. So, can you speak to the motivation piece and how to get students that are generally extrinsically motivated and sedentary to become motivated? I know choice is a huge piece, but sometimes even with a poor self-assessment and multiple choices, some do not want to engage. How do you reach those kids?
Yeah, that's the great question, and this is where I mentioned the stress for both teachers and students. I want okay, so that's a big question. We could have a whole conversation about that. I want people to recognize that for some people, they don't like public speaking. In fact, that's their greatest fear is public speaking. And if you're one of those, you go, yeah, I don't like getting up and speaking in public. Know that for an adolescent, for many adolescents, physical education is like public speaking every time they step in that environment. They're forced to change into activewear that reveals their bodies, and so it's for everybody to display. They're required to do activities, and sometimes the activities are set up in an ego environment where competition is reinforced. And you know, it's unlike math where I can sort of read my textbook or English and read it and do my work and no one else gets to see. Everybody sees. It's like public speaking every day. For many people, this is a traumatic environment, and it can be. So first of all, learning about equity, diversity, and inclusion, learning about first people's principles of learning, finding ways to include people in meaningful ways is the first part. Sure, extrinsic motivation through grades and things might work, but I don't think anybody actually needs extrinsic motivation. I think the way to get to people is intrinsic motivation. And so people are saying, yeah, but some people don't want to be active. Well, yeah, they don't want to be active. That's where they're at in life. Can we engage? And this is why I think we're banging our heads sometimes and creating our own stress and student stress in secondary physical education is because we're setting up environments where we're putting a premium on activity. Conceptual physical education, by definition, includes classroom sessions. And people say, well, we're trying to maximize activity and get kids active. How can we have classroom sessions? Well, you can't run around and learn how to develop a plan. You need time to develop a plan and build knowledge to develop a plan. You need time to work on goal setting, to do exercises around choosing activities, to have discussions about what motivates people in activity. So I truly believe a true physical education flipped classroom should be starting to happen in secondary physical education, where kids get together and do active, experiences in class. Maybe it's active sharing. There are some active units, but they go out and engage in the activity that they want to engage in the community. So we don't put the emphasis on making them active in our setting, because some people say, well, we need to get them active in phys ed. Well, I'm willing to give up activity in physical education class. I'm willing to give up some of that time so that to give kids the knowledge and skills to be active later in life. And I think this would give everybody a big break, and it provides physical and health education with a stronger footing in when we're starting to teach more content. Many people see physical education as just playing games because we have such, I would say, outdated, underdeveloped assessment practices. When we start working on developing some knowledge, when we start having students go out and engage in experiences and document them, engage them in projects that have them scan their environments and come back and reflect on them. That's evidence of student learning. Students building maybe a little circuit on their own and in videotaping and demonstrating it. You know, and someone would say, well, if you, it's sort of like online PE, they'll just go out and they'll cheat. Well, hey, guess what? If a student actually works through self-assessment, smart goal setting, choosing activities, develops a plan, and pretends that they monitored behavior in a self-assessment, they're still running through this process. This idea of back here of doing activity to kids, particularly at the secondary level, you know, I think we create a whole bunch of stress for ourselves. And with conceptual physical education, there's a whole bunch of activities that we can get into. So let's say we do a self-assessment and someone says, I'm inactive and I plan to stay that way. Okay, well, as part of that, that exercise, have them write a short piece about how that might, what benefits do they get now? Maybe what prices do they pay now? How would that benefit them in the future, and what prices might they pay in the future? And so some people are probably listening saying, well, you don't do that in physical education class. Well, why not? This would extend, you know, it would force them to think about this. And if you're talking about motivation, if, you know, the extrinsic motivation, which are there grades to physical education? What does your grading scheme look like? And that's why I said, you know, this is a much larger discussion about how are you evaluating in physical education? Do you have knowledge tests? Do you have demonstrations by students? Do you have portfolios? If you've got those, you've got a sound resource for assessment. And, you know, when someone says, how do we do this cultural shift? One of the ways we start is we send out a little one-page newsletter to students and parents you know, as we start middle school and high school physical education, to say what we're going to do and what's expected and what's our plan, so that they know what the plan is and how students will be assessed, and know that it's not just going to be the standardized, you know, volleyball, basketball, soccer, maybe some floor hockey, get into some track and field later. And, you know, and I hope many people are moving away from that traditional approach. I'm not saying those activities don't belong, but they're a very small portion of what a quality physical education program is at the secondary level, and moving people to a lifetime of fitness and wellness. So I'm not sure how directly I answered that question, but I think there are some nuggets in there, and maybe a chance for a new webinar on that. Faye, before you
yes.
go, I do want to
Uh-huh.
directly answer that, which is he talked about extrinsic motivation, and the
Mhm.
big thing is choice. Get them choosing as much as possible. How many physical educators at the beginning of the semester start to talk to students about what physical activities do they love to do? How do they like to do them? With who? Alone? Outdoors? What have they accessed in the community? What would they hope for in this physical education class? Could you meet every student's needs? No, but you'd at least have an idea of what students are looking for, and you could start to have
Mhm.
that discussion about why you want to do this and what could we do, and meeting
Mhm.
students' needs and having them engage in
Yeah.
some of that using the personal program planning model.
I do remember seeing a PE educator in Canada. He conducted like a school-wide survey
Mhm.
asking the student what they want to do, and the student voted. And I remember parkour was rated #1.
Mm.
And yeah, it was quite amazing to see how many people actually participated in that survey, and the result came out, and he shared it on social media. So I
Yeah.
find it's great to give the student the power to choose.
Well, and I would just finish that, and to answer
Mhm.
that comment, if anybody knows the target model, TARGET, for motivating students, that's what that model is all about. Look it up, the target model in physical education. And so it has, you know, this piece, the A stands for autonomy and R is relatedness. And when you look at the target model, you'll notice that personal program planning hits almost every piece of the target model. And so use the target model, and that's a great reading to start with, and there are lots of articles out there about it. Probably lots of
Okay.
videos about it too.
Awesome. And that question was from Shelby, and thank you so much for this great question.
Hmm.
I know we're way past time, but I will just let in the final question because I think it's a good one. So this question goes, this seems like something we can really use during the online environment we currently find ourselves in. Do you have some examples or recommendations about how we might be able to encourage the social support component during this time?
Oh yeah, totally. I love it. I mean, I'm not necessarily plugging a personal technology meetup platform, but many people are using Zoom, and you have these breakout rooms and different things like that. What a great way to have students go engage in one activity that maybe they've never tried before in their community. Okay. Then bring
Mhm.
together students to, and maybe put a question in there, something for them to ponder. What did you notice? What things did you notice? What were some of the feelings that came up? Who did you see? Um, what did you learn? What did you know already? All those different great educational priming questions. Put a question in their
Mhm.
mind, send out assignment. Then when you bring them together, put them in breakout rooms to share their experiences, and then bring them to come together and maybe have a couple of people share their experiences, a chance to talk about what they did and to connect people that way. That's one basic example. There are,
Mhm.
I think getting students to try things and then come back and share is a great online approach to doing this, which is, hey, we're meeting here. We're not going to meet for very long. Here's your assignment, or you could walk them through their assignment. You can you can pick up the forum on Google Docs, or I'll just walk you through it here. You can write it down right now. Go do that. And when we meet in our next meeting, we're going to discuss your experience in small groups. And you know, uh, that's just off the cuff. You're all professionals out there, so I'm sure you'll generate much better ideas than I would on the spot here. But yeah, then have them come back and talk about it and connect.